are by nature social beings. We have an instinctive need to communicate with one another. Our ability to talk using words that form a language is a uniquely human behavior. We share our thoughts, feelings, desires, and dreams. We reminisce with one another. Hello, my name is Marian Karpinski. I'm a registered nurse, and I'll be your host during this program. Communication is vital to our sense of well-being. We feel good when we can express our needs and feelings and be understood by others. As a caregiver, you may feel that the person you are caring for has more pressing needs than the need to communicate. But without social interaction or the ability to express our needs, we become isolated. We feel lonely, frustrated, and even angry. Human communication is a complex behavior. We often don't appreciate it until we lose it. Hearing loss is the most common communication problem that we may experience as we get older. Approximately 17 million Americans over the age of 65 have significant hearing loss. Sometimes people who have hearing loss appear to be inattentive or may give inappropriate answers to questions. Family and friends may confuse hearing loss with forgetfulness, senility, or stubbornness. Treating a person with hearing loss as if he or she is senile is inappropriate and can make caregiving and communication much more difficult. If you believe that the person you are caring for has hearing loss, keep in mind that hearing loss is loss. As with any personal loss, hearing loss can bring feelings of frustration, anger, anxiety, and loneliness. Hearing loss can affect self-perception, work, relationships, and play.
I've always been a rather outgoing person, and I unconsciously began to develop the attitude that it was almost over, that I didn't want to make a fool of myself by asking 3 or 4 times, "What did you say?" And I could sense that I was kind of pulling into myself, and I didn't like that at all.
Okay.
But it was a big thing in my life. It really was.
The person with hearing loss is not the only one who suffers. Family members often feel frustrated and angry because of their efforts to be heard and understood.
Well, he just didn't hear me unless I repeated it, and yeah, would be very disgusted. At times I think, oh, well, it isn't even worth repeating, you know, so I wouldn't do that.
You'd get angry.
Get angry.
When we're in the pickup going down the road and I say something, he knows I'm talking, but he can't hear what I say, so I have to repeat myself. Also, in the house, if the timer goes off or the doorbell rings or something, he can't tell from what direction the sound's coming from.
And it's very hard for her to really understand me, and sometimes I'll repeat 2 or 3 times the same thing. As a matter of fact, it gets so frustrating. I'll say, "It's a nice sunshiny day today," and she'll say, "What?" And I'll say, "It's a nice sunshiny day today," and then I'll say, "What?" And I'll say, "It's a nice sunshiny day today," you know, and I'll look at her and glare, you know, because it's you want to have some conversation. And instead of having conversation, it feels like a battle. You know, you're trying to get through to her.
An audiologist is a professional trained to identify, prevent, and evaluate hearing problems. An audiologist provides training that develops skills to help a person to compensate for a hearing loss. The audiologist determines whether or not a hearing aid will be beneficial. He or she will select and fit an appropriate hearing aid and follow up as necessary.
There are many things that can cause sensorineural hearing loss. Generally, with the folks that we see, the elderly population, the senior population, it's probably a combination of acquired hearing loss from some past trauma, medications perhaps, history of loss in the family, prior illnesses, medications that they might take, or noise. Frankly, a lot of the nerve loss that we see in today's society, I think, is noise related. The primary symptom of a nerve loss is loss of ability to clearly hear speech, to clearly understand. Sensorineural hearing loss generally occurs very slowly over time. And as it does, frankly, oftentimes the patient is not even aware that this is happening. The complaint that we hear most from the patient is that if everybody would simply speak more clearly and speak to me, I'd be fine. I don't have a hearing problem. My wife has been mumbling for the last 30 years. And I hear that a lot. The reality is that the sensorineural hearing loss that they have takes away their ability to hear certain speech sounds, particularly upper frequency sounds, that help you and I to discriminate whole words and sentences. It would be analogous to trying to read a magazine or a newspaper through a picket fence. You can see part of the information and you get the linguistic context, and then some of it's missing. And then you can read a little more and then some of it's missing. And sensorineural hearing loss does that to you. It takes what would be key words, phrases, sounds at the end of words, and you simply lose them. So rather than hearing the word slide, you hear lied. And rather than hearing boys, you hear boy. Because the S sound is a high frequency sound that's generally lost with sensorineural hearing loss. Another symptom of sensorineural hearing loss is tinnitus, or a ringing in the ears. It can sound like a whistle, it can sound like a foghorn. There are many, many different descriptions of tinnitus. Generally, the family doc or the ear specialist will try to make certain that the tinnitus isn't being caused by a medication. Certain medications are ototoxic and can irritate nerve endings, causing tinnitus. Look at your diet. Tinnitus can be caused by too many cups of coffee, too much caffeine, too much nicotine. When you suspect someone has a hearing problem, the first thing needs to be done is that they need to be checked. They need to be checked either by their family doctor or by an audiologist or an ear specialist. Obviously, the first thing we look for is cerumen, earwax in the ear. Oftentimes you will have a buildup of wax, debris in the ear that blocks normal hearing. It's a relatively simple thing to remove that. If the ear canals are clean and there's not some obvious blockage of sound, the next thing we would do would be a hearing test. I would put him in a booth, put headphones on him, and through a series of calibrated tones and whistles and beeps and groans, and we would essentially measure his hearing. During that time, I would not only measure his hearing ability for different tones, we would measure it for composite speech, which means that I would give him a list of words, first at normal conversation level and then at a raised level which would be comfortable for him, and determine what his hearing is from a word discrimination standpoint. At that point, I would take the pure tone information that I have, the hearing sensitivity that I have, and I would put it in the computer. And you can see you have less hearing loss in the vowel range than you do in the high range, where the consonant sounds reside. Unfortunately, in our language, it's the consonant sounds which give us most of the information that we need to be able to clearly understand. So you're aware that the hearing loss that you have isn't so much not hearing as not understanding, not hearing clearly.
That's right.
Okay.
Sometimes it's convenient.
Uh-huh.
Effective communication helps build a partnership between you and the person you are caring for. Here are some suggestions on how you can communicate effectively with someone who has hearing loss. These suggestions apply whether the person is wearing a hearing aid or not. Never start a conversation between rooms. Go to the person, call him or her by name, or get the person's attention with a gentle touch. If there are distracting noises from appliances, running water, a radio, or television, turn them off before you begin speaking. To minimize interfering sounds, try to have your conversation in rooms that have carpets and drapes, which help reduce background noise. Move closer to the person who has hearing loss. Speak from 3 to 6 feet away at eye level. Even with a hearing aid, it is difficult to hear sounds from a distance. Avoid sitting with your back to a window or a light. Your face will be poorly lit and the light behind you will distract the listener. Always face the listener so that he or she can see your body and face clearly. Through lip movements, facial expression, body postures, and gestures, we receive cues about what is being said. This process is called speech reading. We all speech read to some degree, usually without being aware of it. However, speech reading becomes much more important for someone who has hearing loss. Chewing gum, eating, smoking, or covering your mouth while you speak will interfere with the speech reading process.
When we're eating dinner or we're sitting around as a family talking, but we try not to cover our mouths, chew gum, eat with our mouth full so she can understand us.
It is helpful to mention the topic you want to talk about even before you begin conversation. This gives the person with hearing loss a point of reference.
Getting my attention and making sure that I was aware of the subject that was being discussed before starting a conversation with me, and those things were very important.
Never speak directly into the person's ear. This can distort your message and hide important visual cues from his or her sight. If the person hears better with one ear, speak toward that ear. Adjust the furniture so that the better hearing ear will face the speaker. Speaking slightly louder than usual can be helpful for someone with hearing loss, but try to avoid shouting. Shouting can actually distort your message rather than making it clearer, and you will appear to be angry.
And I've been wearing hearing aids for about 20 years now. Even when you wear a hearing aid, you don't always hear as clearly as you might. And I get really pretty upset when people shout at me and talk loudly at me, because I really can understand, providing they're standing someplace where I can see their face and hear them well.
If I'm not right where she can look at me, then she sometimes doesn't hear me, and then she tells me so, and I tend to speak a little louder, and I try to speak more clearly. Sometimes I overdo it, and that just frustrates her a lot.
And I noticed with other people too, when we tell other people, like a waitress or anybody we meet, that she's hard of hearing, speak a little louder. They don't speak a little louder, they speak a lot louder, see, and that I notice she doesn't, I can see her wince. Even when I do it, you know, when I speak loud, she kind of winces because she doesn't, I guess it must be extremely loud, and learning to kind of lower the voice but go a little higher, but not exaggerated like I was doing.
Speak every word and sentence clearly without exaggerating. Exaggerating your lip movements makes facial cues hard to understand.
One of the things I did was I fixed my voice and tried to enunciate words perfectly correct, like how now, brown cow, and I did that, you know, and that doesn't work.
If you are a fast speaker, slow down. Otherwise, speak at your normal pace. If the person does not appear to understand what is being said, rephrase what you are trying to say using short, simple sentences. Use different words that may be better understood rather than repeating the same thing over and over. Some sounds and words remain difficult to understand, no matter how many times we say them or how loudly we repeat them. If you are communicating something important, ask the person to repeat what you've just said to make sure he or she understands you. Feedback is very important, especially if you are giving instructions. Write down specific information like phone numbers, addresses, or dollar amounts. Give the person plenty of time to answer a question. It may take an elderly, hearing-impaired person longer to respond.
One of the problems that I have is that I don't always understand what people are saying, so it takes me a little longer to process the information that I've heard from someone or to answer their questions.
As a caregiver, it's important to remember that listening can be tiring, especially for someone who wears a hearing aid. The person may not hear and understand as well when he or she feels ill or tired. If you care for someone who is ill, take the time to make sure the hearing aid is in place before you begin care. Loss of communication, even for short periods of time, can begin the feelings of helplessness and frustration. As a caregiver, it's important to recognize the human need to communicate and make the effort to engage in conversation. You can start by being attentive, receptive, and responsive. Look out the window and comment about the weather or whatever might be going on outside. Read a newspaper headline out loud and make a comment. Make a positive remark or ask a question about a personal possession or activity the person is interested in. This approach encourages an exchange of ideas, feelings, and suggestions, which can make your job as a caregiver easier and the outcome of care more satisfying. You can help to prevent feelings of loneliness by moving the person to a window or areas of activity such as the living room or kitchen. Being part of the activity of the house can stimulate thought and provide subject matter for conversations.
The other thing that can be really helpful if you're a hired caregiver or even a family member is to give time to that conversation, to sit at the bedside, to stand, to be fully present when you're talking to the person. That elicits their response back to you and engages them in that two-way conversation. Don't look rushed. Sit and take your time. As a home care nurse going into homes, I'm able to walk in and see how families and caregivers interact with people who are hard of hearing. Oftentimes, it's just a matter of giving commands to them. We're going to do this now, Walter. We're going to do this now, honey. There's no interaction. There's no back and forth. There's no opportunity for the patient to say, I don't really want to do that now, or I have a feeling about that, or let's try this. It has to be two-way for it to be effective, for people to maintain their ability and their willingness to want to enter into the conversation. Not everyone wants to be addressed in familiar terms, honey, grandma. Intimacy takes a while to develop. We need to learn to take the cues from the people that we're talking to, how they want to be addressed, and how best to show them respect.
Ask the person who is hard of hearing what you can do to make it easier for him or her to hear you. Each person is different, and he or she may have suggestions that are specific to his or her type of hearing loss.
My dad has told me that I have several different voices, some of which is very difficult for him to hear. The part of my voice that's hard for him to hear are the high-pitched sounds. If I maintain my voice low enough for him, he's able to pick up much more of my conversation without repeating. Now, this might be different for different people, and sometimes it's just valuable to say, when I talk like this and try a different voice, can you hear me pretty well? Try a different voice. Just experiment with the person that you're with and see where your pitch is that they can hear the best.
There can be many distracting sounds when you're riding in a car, such as a radio or the heating and air conditioning fan. Even the wind noise from an open window can make it difficult to hear for someone with hearing loss. Turn off the radio or fan and roll up the windows before you begin to talk. When in a restaurant, it's best to have the person with hearing loss sit with his or her back to a wall, rather than in the middle of the room. Sit across from the person rather than next to him or her, keeping your face visible. In a group situation, only one person should be talking at one time. Listening is one of the most important communication skills we can learn, but it takes a conscious effort. People who listen well have an open mind. They create a trusting and safe place for others to express themselves. They use eye contact and give undivided attention to the speaker. Good listeners confirm what the speaker says by asking questions.
A hearing aid is basically an electronic amplifier. There are different classes of hearing aids, from conventional to fully digital. And one of the things that I like to point out to patients is that it doesn't matter what we do to the sound through the hearing device. You need to remember that we're still feeding that sound ultimately into your ear, which is damaged. And the hearing aid hasn't changed the damaged portion of the nerve.
One of the problems, I think, when you first get a hearing aid, it takes a long time to get used to them, and so it requires going back and forth to the audiologist and talking to them and having them fine-tune it for you. Once you get used to the hearing aids, however, I hardly even notice that I'm wearing them anymore. If you're taking care of somebody who's wearing a hearing aid, it's very important that they wear that hearing aid all the time. A lot of people who wear hearing aids take them out when they're at home and then put them back in when they go out in the public, and that way you never really get used to them, and they're always then what a lot of people will say is a nuisance. So it's better to put the hearing aids on in the morning when you get out of bed and take them out the last thing at night.
A lot of people said to me, "Don't you think your hearing aids are very noticeable?" And I said, I think they're less noticeable than always asking people to repeat themselves or to be louder. Now that I have my hearing aids, I know that my self-esteem is much better. I can hear. Within 2 months of getting my hearing aids, I was back to work. And for 2 years prior to that, I had not worked simply because I could not hear. Because I had gone so long without being able to hear well, there were times immediately after I got the hearing aids when there would be sounds that I was unfamiliar with because I hadn't heard them in so long. So I'd have to ask, what is that? What is that sound? Sounds would startle me because it had been so long since I had heard those particular sounds. Even a jet in the sky, I had to ask, what is that sound? It was
Yeah.
an amazing experience.
Well, the hearing aids have made all the difference in the world to me, and I couldn't survive without them anymore.
As a caregiver of a person who wears a hearing aid, become familiar with how to maintain a hearing aid. Some elderly people neglect their hearing aids because of mental problems or physical limitations. You should become familiar with how to clean a hearing aid, how to replace batteries, and how to turn the hearing aid on and the volume up or down. Check with an audiologist for more specific instructions. Never attempt to repair a hearing aid yourself. Do not buy a hearing aid without an evaluation by an audiologist. An inappropriate hearing aid can result in further damage to the person's hearing, discouragement, and a negative attitude toward hearing aids.
You can, for a limited amount of money, get a very nice telephone amplifier that will add on to your existing phone and solve a lot of problems. One of the assistive devices that is very popular today is closed captioning. It's available with most television sets. You can access it through one of the functions on your remote control. And you'll simply look under Menu on the remote control, and somewhere as the screen pop-ups, it will give you closed captioning. And you can turn this on or off as you need to. And as you can see, it basically gives you the speech in printed form along with the audio, so that for someone who's really hearing impaired, this can make a big difference in understanding. Also, you can go to an infrared listening device. A transmitter is attached electronically to the TV set. It's not a difficult thing to do. Most of the instructions are very clean.